Welcome to a journey through the quiet corners of history. Tonight, we leave behind the grand battles, towering kings, and sweeping empires, and instead step into the ordinary, into the lives, the labor, and the routines that made survival possible. We will wander through crowded tenements where entire families shared a single room, step into the rhythm of the miller's wheel as bread was ground for villages long ago. Witness the patience of candle makers shaping light in a world without electricity. Descend below the decks of wooden ships to understand the endurance of sailors, and explore the overlooked work of public baths, laundry houses, and bustling steam-made railway stations. These are stories not of heroes or victories, but of human resilience, patience, and quiet labor. They are the hidden threads that held daily life together, often unnoticed, yet utterly essential. So, settle in, let your mind drift through the unnoticed, the repetitive, the mundane, and discover the profound significance of the boring history that shaped our world. When you imagine the 19th century, perhaps you think of railways cutting across the countryside, factories rising with their tall brick chimneys, or ladies in wide crinolines promenading in city parks. Yet for many, the most enduring image of daily life was far less picturesque. The cramped, overcrowded tenement. You can picture the street first. It is narrow, often little more than a lane, with cobblestones worn by thousands of cartwheels. The air carries the smells of coal smoke, horse dung, and refuse tossed from windows. Rows of brick buildings rise on either side, their windows dark and crowded, curtains patched or absent, shutters hanging loose. Laundry lines stretch between them like weary flags, dripping in the gray drizzle of a London, Glasgow, or New York morning. Now, step closer. The tenement doorway yawns open, unpainted wood, scraped and splintered. The entrance is shared by dozens of families, the steps worn smooth by constant use. When you enter, the hallway is dim, lit perhaps by a single oil lamp, or not at all. The walls are damp to the touch, plaster crumbling in flakes, marked with soot and greasy handprints. Water drips somewhere unseen, a reminder of the leaky roof above. At the heart of the building are the rooms themselves, and here you begin to understand the press of life. A single room, often no larger than 12 by 15 feet, might be home to a family of 5, 6, or more. You might find a bed pushed into one corner, shared by parents and the youngest children. Older children sleep on straw mats or directly on the wooden floor. Furniture is sparse: a table, 2 chairs, perhaps a trunk for clothing if the family is fortunate. A fireplace serves both as stove and meager source of heat, though many rooms lack even this and rely on borrowed warmth from neighbors' walls. The day begins early, for there is little choice. A mother rises first, often before dawn, to stoke what little fire can be coaxed from coal scraps or wood chips gathered from alleys. The fire is needed for tea or porridge, if oats or flour can be afforded. The father may already be awake, pulling on worn boots and a patched coat, preparing to join the tide of men walking to the docks, the railway yards, or the factories. Children stir in the cold air, rubbing their eyes, their stomachs already growling with hunger. The tenement is not silent. From every room, sounds spill out: babies crying, kettles clattering, voices calling out in thick accents from Ireland, Scotland, Italy, or Poland, depending on the neighborhood. The hallway fills with the shuffle of feet, the creak of doors, and the smell of shared poverty. One neighbor boils cabbage, another fries herrings, while another simply drinks weak tea before heading to scrub floors in wealthier households. In this small world, survival is measured by the ability to endure inconvenience, discomfort, and indignity. Families share privies in the yard, perhaps one for 50 tenants. The queue is long in the morning, children fidgeting, women with buckets waiting their turn. Water comes from a single pump, its handle worn from countless pulls. On freezing winter mornings, the water stings hands raw, yet it must be carried up narrow stairs to fill pails and pots. The overcrowding is relentless. You can imagine the tension it breeds: quarrels over noise, disputes over shared space, suspicion of thieves among one's neighbors. Yet you also find resilience. Women exchange scraps of food, lend a pinch of salt or coal, keep watch over one another's children. Men share news of work opportunities or lend a hand when a neighbor falls ill. Survival here is not an individual act, but a collective endurance born of necessity. Disease is the invisible resident of every tenement. Damp walls breed mold, stagnant air carries coughs, and vermin scuttle in shadows. Typhus, cholera, and tuberculosis spread with ease when so many bodies breathe the same fetid air. Death comes often to the young, and yet life continues. Families endure, adapt, and carry forward because there is no other option. What strikes you most is not a moment of drama, but the sheer monotony of hardship, the grind of every day, the hauling of water, the cooking of plain meals, the mending of clothes, the endless labor just to sustain existence. The tenement is both shelter and prison, a place of refuge from the street, but also a constant reminder of poverty's grip. And yet, people still laughed here. In the evenings, you might hear a fiddle played, a song sung in a native tongue, or children clapping games in the stairwell. Even in the most overcrowded rooms, moments of joy and solidarity found their place. The human spirit bent, but it did not fully break, so you find yourself standing in that dim, crowded room, the air heavy with coal smoke and human breath, and you wonder, how did entire generations endure such close quarters without collapse? What did it mean for a family to carve out privacy, dignity, and identity when their world was reduced to four walls shared with so many others? If you pause and look more closely at the rhythm of life inside a Victorian tenement, you begin to notice the patterns that shaped survival. Each day repeated itself with only small variations, and within that repetition lay both endurance and exhaustion. The morning began, as always, with movement toward work. For men, this might mean joining the stream of figures, making their way toward factories, shipyards, or construction sites. Boots echoed on wet cobblestones as hundreds set out at once, their shoulders bent beneath the weight of fatigue and hunger. Work was not guaranteed. It depended on the season, on the state of industry, or on whether one's body could still endure the demands of hard labor. To arrive too late might mean standing at the gates while others were chosen first. To fall ill might mean losing a place entirely. Women's work was just as relentless, though it often stayed within the tenement walls. Laundry filled entire days. You can imagine the narrow courtyard of the tenement. Women bending over tubs, sleeves rolled, hands raw from lye soap and cold water. They scrubbed until their backs ached, then hung shirts and sheets to dry on lines strung high between windows. Rain spoiled the effort, leaving clothes damp and smelling faintly of smoke and mildew. Yet the work continued because there was no choice. Clothing had to be cleaned, if only to be presentable enough for labor the next day. Children were not spared from these patterns. The youngest might remain in the room, cared for by older siblings, while mothers worked. Those slightly older were sent out into the streets to sell matches, sweep crossings, or carry parcels. Boys were sometimes apprenticed into trades or sent to the docks to haul and carry. Girls were often hired as maids in wealthier households. The boundary between childhood and adulthood blurred quickly when survival demanded. Every pair of hands contribute. Meals marked the day in small, unsatisfying portions. Breakfast was often thin porridge, black bread, or tea without sugar. Dinner might be a stew of potatoes, cabbage, and whatever scraps of meat could be afforded. Families stretched ingredients carefully. Bones simmered again and again. Crusts of bread softened in broth, flour mixed with water to make flat cakes fried in a bit of fat. Waste was impossible when every mouth hungered. The smell of boiling cabbage or fried herring became the scent of survival. Drifting through hallways, mingling with the acrid smoke of coal inside the room, space was negotiated constantly. Children played in corners or on stairwells. Adults tried to keep order, and possessions were arranged with precision because every inch mattered. Beds doubled as seats. Trunks served as both storage and tables. Privacy existed only in fragments. A turned back, a curtain hung on a rope, a lowered voice. Entire families grew accustomed to sleeping side by side, their breathing filling the night with a chorus of fatigue. The tenement itself imposed a rhythm. Sounds traveled through walls and floors. You could hear the upstairs neighbor's cough, the baby crying 2 doors down, the couple arguing late into the night. Wooden staircases groaned under constant footsteps. The building became a living organism, its residents bound together not by choice but by necessity. Disease was always waiting. Without proper sanitation, outbreaks of cholera, diphtheria, or smallpox swept through entire buildings in weeks. Public health officials sometimes closed tenements, fumigated rooms, or even tore down walls to increase ventilation. Yet these measures were temporary, and overcrowding soon returned. For the families who remained, the threat of illness was simply another fact of life, as ordinary as the morning queue at the water pump. And still, life found its quiet pleasures. On Sundays, families often wore their best, perhaps a coat carefully brushed, a dress patched but neat tanned, attended church. For many, church was less about faith than about community, a place to sit in warmth, to see familiar faces, and to hear music. Children played in alleyways, inventing games with stones or chalk. Neighbors gathered in stairwells to gossip or share news of relatives abroad. Small celebrations, birthdays, weddings, even wakes brought people together in rooms already full. As laughter or song briefly displaced the weight of hardship, what you notice most in these daily patterns is how ordinary they were. For those who lived in the tenements, overcrowding was not remarkable. It was simply life. The narrow rooms, the shared privies, The constant struggle for food and cleanliness became normal, and through this normalization, survival became possible. And yet there lingers a question. How did this way of life shape the generations that followed? Children raised in such conditions carried memories of scarcity, noise, and struggle into adulthood. By now, you can see the crowded tenement not just as a building, but as a system that shaped lives. Its walls held far more than families. They contained the patterns of industrial society itself. The rise of factories, the swelling of cities, the influx of migrants all pressed human bodies into rooms too small, staircases too steep, and courtyards too narrow. The tenement was not merely shelter. It was the architecture of survival in an age of transformation. When reformers first entered these spaces, many were shocked. Investigators and journalists described the stench, the damp, the cramped sleeping arrangements. Reports were published with grim details, entire families lying together on a single mattress, children coughing with tuberculosis, sewage leaking into basements. For readers in comfortable houses, such descriptions seemed almost unbelievable. Yet for those who lived there, this was simply the backdrop of existence. The overcrowded room left marks on health, of course. Generations grew up stunted by poor nutrition, their bodies weakened by constant illness. Infant mortality was high, and many children did not reach their 5th birthdays. Those who did often carried the scars of disease or injury into adulthood. Even the act of breathing inside a poorly ventilated tenement room carried risks, with smoke, damp, and contagion hanging in the stagnant air. But survival also meant adaptation. Families learned to stretch resources with extraordinary care. A single garment might pass through several children, patched again and again until little of the original fabric remained. Food was eked out with ingenuity soups thickened with barley, puddings made from stale bread, herbs gathered from cracks in city walls. Skills of endurance were passed down as surely as lullabies or prayers. Children who grew up in the tenements often carried those habits with them, even if they later escaped into better circumstances. They remembered the discipline of thrift, the need to share, and the reality that comfort could vanish quickly. In this way, the cramped room shaped not only individuals, but entire cultures of working-class life. The tenement also created networks of solidarity. In overcrowded buildings, neighbors could not avoid one another. Disputes were frequent, but so were bonds of mutual reliance. Women cared for each other's infants, lent food, or kept vigil at sick. Men looked out for one another in workplaces where accidents were common. Festivals and funerals were collective affairs, spilling from rooms into courtyards and streets. Out of the crush of poverty, a sense of communities, sometimes fragile, sometimes enduring, took root. Reform movements grew from these conditions. By the late 19th century, social activists pressed governments to improve housing. Laws required more windows, better ventilation, and limits on occupancy. Model dwellings were built to demonstrate healthier alternatives. Yet progress was slow. Many families remained in overcrowded rooms well into the 20th century. Change came not only from reform, but also from gradual shifts in wages, opportunities, and the growth of suburbs as railways expanded. Still, the memory of the tenement lingered. For many immigrants, whether Irish in New York or rural Scots in Glasgow, The tenement was the first experience of city life. Letters sent back home often described both the misery and the opportunity found there. Out of those crowded rooms came workers who built railways, staffed factories, and joined unions. Out of those rooms also came stories of survival that shaped family identities for generations. You might wonder, then, what the tenement teaches us now. In many modern cities, overcrowding remains a reality, though in different forms. Informal housing, slums, and shared apartments echo the same struggles. Too many bodies in too little space. Survival dependent on cooperation, endurance, and ingenuity. The Victorian tenement reminds us that history is not only about monuments and leaders, but also about the ordinary persistence of families in difficult rooms. As you leave behind the dim stairwell and close the door on that cramped space, you are left with a lingering thought. Was the tenement a symbol of progress, proof that cities could absorb the masses and fuel industrial growth? Was it a sign of neglect, the cost paid by the poor so that wealth and power could flourish elsewhere? Imagine, if you will, the edge of a quiet village in medieval or early modern Europe. The sun has not yet fully risen, and mist clings to the low hills and the slow-moving river that turns the village mill's wheel. You hear the soft, rhythmic splash of water against wood, the creak of the wheel as it begins to turn. This is the heart of survival, the mill where grain is transformed into flour, and flour into bread, the daily sustenance upon which every villager depends. The mill itself is a modest building, its walls built from roughly hewn stone or timber. Inside, the air is cool and damp, smelling faintly of grain and dust. Large wooden gears click and grind, powered by the water wheel outside. You might imagine stepping carefully over sawdust-strewn floors, the boards uneven beneath your feet, your ears filled with the constant hum of machinery. The miller is already at work. He is a figure of both authority and diligence, responsible not only for grinding grain, but for ensuring that every family in the village receives its share in a timely manner. His day begins before dawn. He lights a lantern and checks the water levels, ensuring the wheel will turn smoothly. He inspects the millstones, heavy and circular, grooved to grind wheat efficiently. One stone rests atop another, and the precision of their placement determines the quality of the flour. You notice how much of his work is physical. He lifts sacks of grain, often heavy beyond modern standards, and carries them across the mill floor. He sifts, measures, and rotates the grain, ensuring that the milling process is consistent. Even a small error, too fast, too slow, or improperly spaced stones can ruin the flour, leaving villagers with bitter or coarse bread. Every family's survival depends on his attentiveness. Outside, the village begins to stir. Farmers bring their harvested grain to be milled, trudging up from fields with carts or by foot. They exchange greetings with neighbors, remark on the weather, or discuss livestock and harvests. Yet the conversation is limited. The work is urgent. Grain must be processed quickly, lest dampness, pests, or spoilage diminish the harvest. For the villagers, the mill represents security and risk simultaneously. A breakdown could leave them hungry. Inside the mill, the rhythm of grinding becomes almost hypnotic. The stones turn, the grain crushes, dust rises in pale clouds. Children of the miller might be present, tasked with small duties, sweeping the floor, carrying water, or helping measure flour into sacks. Apprentices may stand by, learning the craft, their hands already familiar with the repetitive labor that will one day define their livelihoods. You can almost feel the quiet tension in the room, a mixture of routine and responsibility. Food security in this context was fragile. A poor harvest, a broken wheel, or a swollen river could threaten the village's supply. Flour could be rationed, bread made thinner, or families forced to skip meals. The miller, in his unassuming building, held a kind of quiet power. He controlled the transition from harvest to daily sustenance. Without him, the village could not endure. It is also worth noting the social dynamics at play. The miller often received payment not only in coins, but in a portion of the grain itself, a practice called multure. This system bound him to the village economically, but also created a subtle hierarchy. Villagers depended on him, yet they also watched for signs of greed or negligence. Disputes over flour quality or quantity could arise, sometimes leading to confrontations that were more than simple complaints. They were struggles over survival. Life outside the mill is quieter, but the consequences of milling are everywhere. Families rise early to bake bread, tending fires in small ovens. Women measure flour carefully, mixing it with water and yeast, kneading it until it can rise. Children help shape loaves or keep watch over the dough. Every meal, every day, is in some way tied to the labor of the miller, whose own day stretches long before they even awaken. And yet, for all its centrality, the work of the miller is monotonous and exhausting. Long hours, physical labor, and the constant responsibility to the community leave little room for rest. Still, there is dignity here. The knowledge that survival for the village depends on one's hands and attention. The mill is a microcosm of human endurance, a quiet testament to the ways ordinary labor sustains society. As the sun climbs and the river glints with morning light, you leave the miller at his stones, dust clinging to his clothing, ears ringing with the constant grind. You wonder, though, how does a single man or a small family of millers maintain this delicate balance year after year, when every failure can ripple through an entire village? As morning advances, the mill's rhythm becomes almost hypnotic, the steady turn of the water wheel dictating the pace of the day. Grain comes in from the fields, bags slung over shoulders, wheels squeaking under weight. The miller inspects each sack, noting its quality and moisture content. Too damp, and the flour may spoil. Too dry, and it may require extra grinding. Every detail matters, for the villager's bread depends on the precise transformation of raw grain into fine flour. Inside, the miller coordinates with his apprentices or family members, distributing tasks. One child sweeps the floor, carrying dust into a corner to prevent it from entering the flour. Another adjusts the gears, listening for subtle changes in the creak of wood or grind of stone that signal misalignment. You notice the care required. Even a single misstep can produce flour too coarse for bread or too fine to hold structure. It is a quiet, exacting science, though it has been learned through trial, error, and experience handed down across generations. Outside the village hums with dependency. Farmers arrive with the day's harvest, some anxious about quotas, others casual, accustomed to the routine. Payment is not always in coins. Often, the miller accepts grain in exchange for service, a system that ensures the mill can operate continuously while villagers maintain their livelihoods. The give and take reflects a delicate balance: trust, skill, and mutual reliance. Any breach can create tension, and the miller must navigate social as well as mechanical responsibilities. The work is relentless. From dawn until dusk, the stones grind, and the miller barely pauses. Dust clings to skin and hair, mixing with sweat and the faint scent of the river. Hands blister, muscles ache, yet stopping is rarely an option. Families depend on the constant output of flour, for without it, bread will not rise and hunger looms. Apprentices watch closely, absorbing both technique and the tacit knowledge of endurance. Beyond the mechanical labor, the miller also acts as an informal regulator. He records who has brought grain and who has received flour, ensuring that every household receives its due share. Mistakes or favoritism could spark disputes, sometimes escalating to public complaints in the village square. In this way, the miller embodies both sustenance and social order. He is not merely a laborer, but a node in the network that sustains communal life despite the weight of responsibility. There are quiet moments of observation and reflection. Watching grain transform into flour, you notice the subtle changes in texture, color, and smell. The hum of the millstones becomes almost meditative. The river outside continues its steady push, carrying water that turns the wheel, much as the village depends on the mill. Time is measured in rotations, in bagfuls of grain processed, in loaves baked later that day. Evenings bring their own rhythm. The miller may finally pause to inspect the last sacks, ensure the stones are cleaned, and check the water wheel before nightfall. Family members help tidy the space, carrying empty sacks out, brushing dust from surfaces, and preparing the mill for another day. The work is cyclical, each day resembling the last. Yet no day is truly identical. Weather, river levels, and crop quality vary, demanding constant vigilance. You also see resilience emerging in subtle ways. Families ration flour with ingenuity, extending it to feed everyone with minimal waste. Bread is baked in different forms to last longer, sometimes flattened or mixed with other grains or roots. Skills in preservation, measurement, and careful planning are passed down from parents to children, ensuring that survival knowledge persists even in times of scarcity. Yet, for all the order and diligence, uncertainty always lingers. A sudden flood, a frozen river, or a broken millstone could throw the village into crisis. Illness might reduce the workforce, or a poor harvest could stretch supplies dangerously thin. The miller's role is never just technical, it is existential. He holds, quite literally, the village's nourishment in his hands, and any lapse carries weight far beyond his own family. By nightfall, you realize the mill has shaped more than food production. It has shaped the lives, routines, and expectations of the entire village. Children grow up understanding labor, responsibility, and the fragile interdependence of community. Adults carry the constant awareness that survival depends on skill, endurance, and mutual reliance. The mill is both a place of work and a living testament to human adaptation in a world of scarcity. And yet, as you leave the warm, dust-filled interior and step outside into the cooling evening air, you might wonder, how did villages cope when the mill faltered? or when harvests failed year after year. Could such a fragile system sustain life in the long term? Or were communities always teetering on the edge of hunger and hardship? As the days turn into weeks, the mill reveals its role not merely as a workplace, but as the invisible backbone of village life. Flour produced here is the foundation of sustenance. Bread made from it sustains bodies and labor alike. The miller's work, repetitive and often unremarkable to outsiders, becomes the quiet engine of survival. Without his careful attention, families might face hunger, illness, or even starvation. Failures in the milling process, though rare, are consequential. A cracked millstone can produce flour contaminated with grit, teeth chipped by small fragments of stone. Too coarse a grind, and bread fails to rise properly. Too fine, and the dough becomes sticky and difficult to bake. The miller's expertise, honed over years of observation and repetition, ensures that these errors are minimized. His skill is as much about judgment and intuition as it is about manual labor. Village life revolves around the predictable output of the mill. Women rise before dawn to bake bread, carrying flour in pails and measuring it with care. They knead and shape loaves with practiced hands, their motions dictated by generations of knowledge. Children assist, often learning early that small mistakes can have immediate consequences. A loaf to dry may crack. A loaf to wet may collapse. The family's daily rhythm is synchronized with the wheel outside, the stones inside, and the river that powers them both. The miller's family shares both burden and privilege. They inherit authority, responsibility, and sometimes resentment. Villagers depend on them, yet they may also harbor suspicion. After all, a miller could favor one farmer's grain over another, intentionally or not. Relationships are delicate, trust fragile. The miller must navigate both mechanics and social expectation. Balancing fairness with practicality, seasons shape the miller's work and the village's survival in profound ways. Spring may bring soft rains and swollen rivers, perfect for turning the wheel, but potentially dangerous for flooding. Summer yields abundant grain, but also challenges in storage and spoilage. Autumn harvests demand long hours and careful planning, and winter requires maintenance of machinery when resources are scarce. Each season imposes constraints, and the miller's ability to adapt determines the community's resilience, even in hardship. The mill and the act of grinding grain reveal human ingenuity. Families invent ways to store flour, keep pests away, and stretch their supplies. Bread may be made from mixed grains or enriched with roots, nuts, or seeds to supplement scarce wheat. Apprentices learn techniques not only to grind effectively, but to manage time, ration resources, and solve mechanical problems quickly. Knowledge passes quietly from one generation to the next, embedded in routine rather than formal instruction. Yet, for all the competence and adaptation, danger never fully disappears. Floods, droughts, or disease could devastate crops. A poorly maintained millstone could ruin a day's output. Villagers who relied on bread as their primary sustenance were acutely aware of these risks. Anxiety was a constant companion, an invisible companion as certain as the sound of the turning water wheel, reflecting on the mill's role. You begin to see a larger truth. Survival is rarely heroic in the conventional sense. It is steady, repetitive, and dependent on careful attention to detail. The miller's unglamorous labor, day after day, hour after hour, sustains life itself. Communities depended not on singular moments of bravery, but on the quiet competence of those who understood their work and committed themselves to it. The story of the mill extends beyond flour and bread. It is about human endurance, the management of risk, and the ways ordinary lives intersect with broader social and economic systems. The miller, in his unassuming role, provides a lens into the lived experience of countless historical communities, where survival depended on labor, skill, and continuity more than chance. As you leave the mill at dusk, watching the water wheel turn in the fading light, you might pause to consider how many villages survived only because of the quiet diligence of one family. How often did the resilience of ordinary people, grinding, baking, rationing, determine the fate of entire communities? And what does this tell us about the countless hidden figures in history whose labor, though unnoticed, shaped the very survival of society itself? Imagine walking down a narrow, cobbled street in a European village or town during the 17th or 18th century. The sun dips low and shadows lengthen across timbered houses. There are no gas lamps or electric lights to guide your path only the occasional flicker of candlelight spilling from open windows, or from the small shops lining the street. Each flame is a product of labor, skill, and patience, created long before you reached it. Usually a single room above or behind the front of a house. It smells faintly of wax, tallow, and smoke. Tools are simple but numerous, molds of various sizes, dipping pots, knives, and wicks carefully twisted by hand. Barrels of rendered tallow or beeswax line the walls, some covered with cloth to protect them from dust or pests. Sunlight filters through small windows during the day, illuminating particles of wax dust suspended in the air like tiny motes. The flicker of a single lantern adds warmth to the otherwise cool room. Tallow, often rendered from beef or mutton fat, must be melted carefully to the right temperature. Too hot, and the wax may burn or crack. Too cool, and it refuses to set properly. Beeswax, rarer and more expensive, is softer, sweeter in smell, and requires careful handling to preserve its clarity. Wick preparation is critical. Strands of cotton or linen are twisted and trimmed, ensuring that each candle will burn evenly and steadily. Early in the morning, the candle maker begins the process of dipping. The wick is lowered into the warm liquid repeatedly, a slow, measured rhythm. Each dip adds a thin layer, and the process may be repeated dozens of times to build a candle of sufficient thickness to last through a night. You notice the quiet concentration required. One misstep, a too quick lift, an uneven coating can produce a candle that bends, cracks, or burns unpredictably. Even the smallest imperfection renders the work flawed. Children or apprentices often assist in this labor. Their tasks might include carrying molds, cutting wicks, or stirring the melting wax. Each action must be precise, for mistakes waste precious material. Apprentices learn through repetition, observation, and correction, absorbing not only technical skill, but also the patience and care required to produce something as deceptively simple as a candle. Outside, the demand for light drives the work. Villages, towns, and even wealthier households cannot survive without illumination after sunset. Candle makers supply local markets, taverns, and homes, often selling by weight or size. A single household might consume dozens of small tallow candles per month. The livelihood of the candle maker depends on consistency and reliability. A shortage in production could leave a community in darkness. Safety is an ever-present concern. Molten tallow and wax can scald, and fires are a constant risk. Workshops were often equipped with a bucket of water or sand for emergencies, but accidents still occurred. Smoke and fumes add another layer of discomfort, and prolonged exposure can irritate eyes, skin, and lungs. Yet, despite these risks, the work is essential, and the candle maker persists, knowing that countless families rely on his craft to light the night. Even in this modest space, you begin to notice patterns of life shaped by light. Families adjust their schedules around available illumination. Meals are prepared, studied, or read by candlelight. Stories are told, letters written, and work continued after sunset, all made possible by the labor that produces those slender columns of wax. Each flame carries with it the quiet dedication of a maker, a laborer whose work shapes daily life in ways rarely acknowledged. And yet, the craft is not only technical, it has social and economic dimensions. Candle makers interact with merchants, negotiate prices, and adapt to changing demand. Seasonal variations in consumption, longer nights in winter, festivals requiring more candles affect production schedules. Success depends as much on foresight and planning as on skillful hands. As the evening deepens, and you watch the workshop glow with the golden hue of molten wax, you realize that the candlemaker's world is both ordinary and extraordinary. Every flickering flame that illuminates a home carries with it hours of careful work, patience, and attention. It is a world where survival, comfort, and ritual depend on diligence, repetition, and endurance. And yet, as you step away from the warm glow and into the darkened streets, a question lingers. How many nights were made possible not by invention or discovery, but by the quiet, repetitive labor of ordinary hands, shaping wax and tallow into light? As the days progress in the candlemaker's workshop, a rhythm emerges, dictated by necessity and the unyielding passage of time. Early mornings are devoted to preparation, sorting tallow, washing and twisting wicks, and ensuring that all equipment is clean and functional. Each step must be precise, for mistakes at the start of the process ripple outward, affecting every candle produced that day. Dipping remains the core of the work. The apprentice lowers a wick into molten tallow, lifting it carefully, rotating it, then allowing it to cool before the next dip. Layer by layer, the candle thickens. The air is filled with a faint, greasy aroma, mingled with the earthy scent of smoke from the workshop hearth. Dust motes float in the lamplight, visible as they drift over the glistening wax. It is repetitive work, yet it demands concentration. A momentary lapse can result in uneven coating, misshapen candles, or one that will burn too quickly and unevenly. The candlemaker's hands are roughened, scarred from years of exposure to hot wax, smoke, and tallow. Fingers bear small burns and calluses, each a testament to countless hours of patient labor. Eyes, accustomed to the dim light, detect the faintest changes in color or texture. Such skills are not taught in manuals, but absorbed through observation and experience. Apprentices watch intently, mimicking every motion, gradually learning the subtle balance of temperature, timing, and pressure required to produce reliable light outside the workshop. The world relies on the results of this labor. Houses, shops, and even churches depend on candles to extend the day. Women cook and sew by their warm glow. Men complete trades that require precision after sunset. Children study or play while shadows dance on walls. Each flame, delicate and temporary, carries the labor of hours spent in concentrated, often tedious effort. Economic pressures shape the workflow as much as the craft itself. Tallow, though inexpensive, must be managed carefully. Waste is unacceptable, for the price of raw material weighs heavily on profits. Beeswax, rare and costly, is allocated sparingly, reserved for wealthier clients or religious ceremonies. The candlemaker must anticipate demand, adjusting production schedules for seasons, festivals, or sudden shortages. Delays can affect not only income but the ability of households to function after dark. Hazards persist. Molten tallow burns, slips from containers, or ignites fires if left unattended. Smoke and fumes irritate eyes and lungs. The workshop is never entirely comfortable. Temperatures swing between freezing winters and stifling summer heat, while dust and debris accumulate in corners and on shelves. Yet despite these challenges, the work continues day after day, driven by both economic necessity and social responsibility. The candlemaker's life is entwined with the cycles of the community he serves. Festive seasons see a surge in demand. Candles for religious observances, weddings, or special meals. Dark winters require longer production days to ensure households are not plunged into darkness. Even small villages rely on predictable availability. A shortage can disrupt the rhythm of domestic life, forcing families to ration light, cut evenings short, or go without entirely. In observing the workshop, you also notice the interplay between labor and resilience. Every worker, apprentice, family member, or journeyman learns endurance, patience, and meticulous attention to detail. Small innovations emerge, ways to reduce splashing, techniques for faster dipping without compromising quality, or methods to reuse scraps of wax efficiently. The work demands both precision and improvisation, as the candlemaker balances craft, risk, and practical constraints. And yet, the candlemaker's contribution extends beyond mere illumination. His labor shapes the daily life, schedules, and even social interactions of the village. Families organize around the hours of available light. Gatherings, studies, and chores are measured in candle power. The quiet, repetitive work that produces this light becomes an invisible force, structuring time itself as dusk settles and candles flicker in windows along the streets. You begin to appreciate the invisible network that sustains daily life. Each household flame carries with it countless hours of patient, disciplined labor. The candlemaker and his apprentices, largely unnoticed, provide a foundation for survival, comfort, and ritual. And yet, as you step away from the workshop into the dim streets, a question arises: how much of daily life, both ordinary and extraordinary, has depended on repetitive, unseen labor like this. How many moments of learning, celebration, or survival occurred only because someone had carefully crafted a slender column of wax to hold the night at bay? As the candlemaker's days unfold, you begin to see the broader significance of his craft. Each candle, though small and unassuming, is a critical instrument of daily survival and societal function. Without these flames, evenings would be dark, chores incomplete, work delayed, and study or reading impossible. In a world without electric light, a single candle could determine whether a household endured, learned, or rested effectively. The cumulative effort is remarkable. Every day, the candlemaker produces dozens, perhaps hundreds, of candles. Each requires attention to detail, patience, and physical endurance. Wicks must be twisted to precise tension. Wax must be maintained at correct temperatures. Dips must be consistent. Even small imperfections, even coating, air bubbles, or cracks could render a candle unreliable. Yet this labor is largely invisible to the broader community. Villagers rarely consider the hours spent preparing light. They take for granted the flicker that allows them to continue their daily lives once the sun sets. Economic pressures shape the craft in subtle ways. Prices fluctuate with demand, supply of tallow or beeswax, and seasonal needs. During festivals or religious observances, the candlemaker may work from dawn to dusk, melting wax and dipping wicks in relentless succession. Yet the work is steady, predictable, and essential, a rare combination in a world often marked by uncertainty. Families depend on him not just for light, but for the continuation of their routines, domestic labor, and social cohesion. The candlemaker's family participates in this cycle. Apprentices learn the craft as children, absorbing the meticulous habits and the unspoken rules of patience, safety, and diligence. In this way, knowledge is transmitted quietly, embedded in daily practice rather than formal instruction. The workshop becomes both school and livelihood, teaching endurance, responsibility, and adaptability beyond economic and technical concerns. The candlemaker's work carries social weight. Churches, inns, and wealthy households rely on his products. Light is a necessity for worship, business, and domestic life. A shortage or mistake could disrupt routines, curtail evening activities, and even endanger safety. In providing steady, reliable illumination, the candlemaker exerts a subtle but profound influence on the village's functioning. Yet, for all its importance, the craft is often overlooked in historical accounts. Unlike kings, generals, or inventors, candlemakers rarely appear in chronicles. Their labor is invisible, yet indispensable. They illustrate a crucial principle. Ordinary work, repeated day after day, sustains society in ways both practical and profound. The quiet, repetitive diligence of these artisans is a foundation upon which countless lives depended. As night falls and candles glow in every window, you see the traces of human endurance, patience, and resilience. Every flicker represents a moment of labor, a sequence of decisions, a thread in the fabric of daily life. The candlemaker's work is an invisible scaffolding, holding together domestic schedules, social rituals, and community functioning. And finally, as you leave the warm glow of the workshop and step into the street lined with flickering lights, one question lingers. how many aspects of history, of survival, and of ordinary human life depend not on grand events or heroic figures, but on quiet, repetitive labor like this sand scene, yet utterly indispensable. Picture a wooden ship moored at a busy port in the 17th or 18th century. The air is thick with the smell of tar, salt, and sweat. Above deck, sailors shout orders, unfurl sails, and heave ropes. Below deck, life is quieter, cramped, and far less glamorous. Here, in the dark hold, hundreds of ordinary mensalers, apprentices, and cabin boys spend the bulk of their lives, eking out survival amid the movement of the vessel, the sway of the sea, and the oppressive confines of wooden beams. Stepping below, the world changes instantly. Light is dim, filtered through small portholes or lanterns hung along the bulkheads. The air is heavy, humid, and smells of wood, salt, and unwashed body. The floor is uneven, littered with barrels, ropes, and coils of cordage. Hammocks are strung in rows, swinging gently with the ship's motion. Men sleep close together, pressed side by side, sharing warmth in the cold air. Privacy is virtually non-existent. The only space belongs to a hammock or a small corner cleared for personal belongings. Every inch of space is functional. Barrels store provisions, salted meat, dried beans, flour, and biscuits. Tools and spare sails are stacked or hung with careful precision to prevent accidents. Every object has its place, because chaos at sea can be deadly. Even small mistakes, an unsecured rope or a shifted barrel, could cause injury or worse during storms. Life below deck is a constant negotiation between space, motion, and survival. The daily routine is dictated by the ship's schedule and the tides. Sailors rise early, often to the groan of a bell or the captain's call, to begin maintenance tasks, cleaning the deck, repairing sails, or scrubbing the hull. Below deck, other work continues. Barrels are checked, provisions counted, and hammocks tidied. The smell of cooking, when a small stove or galley is in operation, mingles with the pervasive scent of damp wood and salt water. Meals are simple: hardtack biscuits, salted meat, and occasionally dried fruit or cheese, eaten quickly before the next duty. Hygiene is minimal. Water is rationed, mostly reserved for drinking or cooking, leaving little for washing. Men often go days without bathing, relying on seawater to rinse themselves when possible. Clothes are worn until frayed, patched repeatedly. The close quarters, combined with poor hygiene, create ideal conditions for lice, scurvy, and other illnesses. Disease is a constant companion, spreading quickly among men who live shoulder to shoulder in hammocks that swing with every wave. Work below deck is monotonous but essential. Sailors spend hours maintaining, rigging, repairing ropes, or preparing sails for the next shift. The constant motion of the ship makes even small tasks precarious. One misstep could lead to a sprained ankle or a fall into a barrel of provisions. Yet, discipline is strict, and every man knows the consequences of negligence. Survival depends not on luck, but on attention, endurance, and the ability to endure discomfort without complaint. Despite the hardships, camaraderie forms. Men share stories, smoke pipes, and trade small comforts: a piece of cloth, a tin of salted meat, or a joke to lift spirits. These moments are brief but vital, breaking the monotony of labor and the oppressive weight of the enclosed space. Below deck, social bonds are forged not by choice but by necessity. Men rely on one another for both safety and psychological endurance. Evenings bring little respite. The ship creaks and groans, waves lapping against the hull, lanterns casting flickering shadows on the beams. Men lie in their hammocks, listening to the rhythm of the sea and the occasional call from above deck. Sleep is fitful, disturbed by motion, noise, or the proximity of others. Yet these hours are crucial. Rest is a form of survival, preparing the body and mind for another day in confined, demanding conditions. And as you linger in this dim, swinging space, it becomes clear that life below deck is an exercise in endurance, adaptation, and quiet resilience. Men survive not through heroism, but through repetition, shared vigilance, and a rigid adherence to routines that keep both the ship and themselves functioning. And yet, a question persists. How did these men maintain their physical and mental health over long voyages, often months at a time, in conditions so cramped, damp, and perilous that the smallest error could prove fatal? As the ship leaves port and the open sea stretches ahead, life below deck settles into a rigid rhythm dictated by both the tides and the ship's schedule. Work, meals, and rest are carefully timed, for disorder at sea can quickly become disaster. Each sailor learns the necessity of predictability. The routine itself becomes a tool of survival. Mornings begin before dawn, often with the sharp creak of the ship or the captain's call. Sailors climb from hammocks, still damp from the night, feet finding purchase on wet, shifting planks. The first duties involve checking the hull, inspecting rigging, and ensuring that barrels of provisions are secure. One misplaced barrel can roll under the sway of the waves, smashing biscuits or crushing tools and creating hazards for anyone below. Attention to detail is essential. The ocean leaves no room for negligence. Meals are simple but functional. Hardtack, salted meat, and occasionally dried legumes sustain the men, often eaten cold due to the limited heat sources in the galley. Water is rationed carefully. Seawater is undrinkable, so every drop is measured. Meals are eaten quickly and in shifts, for space is limited and time is precious. Even during consumption, sailors remain alert. The ship's motion can overturn containers, spill food, or tip lanterns, creating danger. Hygiene remains a constant challenge. The hold is damp and poorly ventilated. Clothes are worn repeatedly and patched extensively. Disease spreads rapidly in such conditions. Lice, scurvy, and dysentery are common threads. Sailors learn strategies to reduce risk, airing bedding on deck, soaking clothing in seawater when possible, and maintaining cleanliness around the galley and provisions. Yet, despite precautions, sickness often strikes, and the crew must cope collectively, relying on each other for care and support. Work below deck is monotonous but unrelenting. Sailors oil pulleys, repair frayed ropes, and maintain sails in preparation for the captain's commands. Every task requires balance and concentration. The ship's sway turns ordinary labor into a delicate negotiation with gravity. Even cleaning, which might seem mundane, is critical. Slippery decks or dislodged equipment can become life-threatening hazards in rough seas. Discipline and vigilance are not optional. They are matters of life and death. Social life, though constrained, emerges through necessity. Men share stories in brief moments between tasks, trade small comforts, and provide support during sickness or injury. These interactions build camaraderie, a fragile but vital lifeline in an environment where isolation is impossible. Conflicts are frequent but contained, for hostility can compromise both safety and cohesion. The crew becomes a tightly knit community, bound less by friendship than by shared dependence on endurance and skill. Nighttime below deck offers only partial relief. Lanterns flicker, shadows sway, and the constant hum of the ship blends with the creak of timbers and the slap of waves. Sleep is fragmented, interrupted by duties, storms, or the subtle rocking that makes rest precarious. Yet, these hours are critical. Sailors must conserve energy for long shifts and maintain vigilance against hazards above and below deck. Even rest is a form of labor, a preparation for continued survival. The long voyages magnify all challenges. Weeks at sea test endurance, patience, and ingenuity. Sailors develop routines to cope with monotony and confinement, counting knots, repairing small items, or quietly observing the ocean. They adapt to scarcity and unpredictability, learning to stretch provisions, manage fatigue, and maintain morale. Survival is not heroic. It is a product of repetition, attention, and collective perseverance. And yet, in this darkness and close confinement, one wonders, how did sailors maintain both their bodies and their minds over months at sea? How did they endure the relentless monotony, cramped quarters, and constant hazards without succumbing entirely to illness, despair, or injury? As weeks stretch into months, life below deck crystallizes into an unbroken cycle of labor, vigilance, and endurance. Every sailor becomes intimately familiar with the ship's every creak. The smell of damp wood, the motion of waves, and the limited space that confines them. Survival depends on adherence to routine, cooperation among the crew, and careful management of scarce provisions. The ordinary details, the cleaning of decks, maintenance of ropes, repair of sails, become extraordinary in their cumulative importance. Illness and injury are constant threats. Scurvy, caused by vitamin deficiency, weakens muscles and gums. Dysentery spreads quickly through crowded hammocks. Injuries from tools or shifting equipment can be severe and slow to heal. Sailors learn to treat minor wounds themselves, improvise remedies from shipboard supplies, and assist those too ill to move easily. The collective survival of the crew is dependent on each individual's resilience and ability to adapt. For neglect endangers everyone. Food scarcity imposes strict discipline. Hardtack, salted meat, and occasionally dried legumes are rationed carefully. Water is counted, measured, and conserved. Even small miscalculations in consumption can have severe consequences over long voyages. Sailors develop techniques for extending provisions, soaking hard biscuits, supplementing with seaweed or foraged items when possible, and sharing rations equitably to prevent tension. Every meal is a lesson in resource management, endurance, and communal responsibility. Social bonds are strengthened in these confined conditions. The necessity of cooperation fosters quiet loyalty, mutual vigilance, and a sense of collective responsibility. Men assist each other in performing dangerous tasks, share limited comforts, and maintain morale through humor, storytelling, or simple companionship. The ship functions not merely as a vessel, but as a microcosm of human society. Hierarchies, responsibilities, and interpersonal dynamics are magnified in the close quarters of the hold. Sleep remains fragmented but essential. Hammocks swing with the ship's movement, forcing sailors to adapt their posture and rest lightly. Night watches, storms, or urgent tasks interrupt even the briefest moments of rest. Sleep itself is survival training, reinforcing endurance. The capacity to rest in such conditions amid noise, motion, and proximity to others is as much a skill as any manual task. Long voyages highlight human ingenuity. Sailors invent small devices or techniques to ease their labor: makeshift pulleys, hooks for securing barrels, or clever arrangements of hammocks to maximize limited space. They adapt to scarcity, improvising solutions to maintain hygiene, safety, and comfort. These adaptations are not recorded in history books, yet they exemplify practical intelligence born of necessity as the ship finally approaches port after weeks at sea. The crew's labor becomes visible to outsiders only in the outcome: a vessel intact, sails mended, provisions managed, and a crew tired but alive, ready to disembark. The hidden toil below deck, repetitive, monotonous, and perilous, is rarely acknowledged. Yet it was the foundation of maritime life, ensuring commerce, communication, and survival. Reflecting on life below deck, it becomes evident that endurance, cooperation, and routine define survival more than heroism. The sailor's skill was not only in seamanship, but in persistence, the ability to navigate the mechanical, physical, and psychological challenges of confinement over extended periods. Their labor underlies the broader narratives of exploration, trade, and empire, though it remains largely invisible. And as you leave the hold, stepping onto the open deck and feeling the wind for the first time in weeks, one question lingers: how many human endeavors, discoveries, and societal developments depended on the quiet, relentless endurance of those who toiled unseen, enduring the oppressive, unglamorous reality of life below deck? Imagine walking through a bustling city street in early modern Europe. The air carries a mixture of smoke, soot, and steam. Amid the houses, shops, and narrow alleys, you notice the large, sturdy buildings devoted to a singular purpose: cleaning. Public baths and laundry houses stand as monuments to hygiene, labor, and survival, though survival here is measured not in bread or light, but in cleanliness, disease prevention, and domestic routine. Entering a public bath, the space is warm, humid, and heavy with the scent of soap, herbs, and damp bodies. The structure is functional. Large tubs or basins, often carved from stone or lined with wood, hold scalding water. Benches line the walls, and shelves are filled with scrubbing brushes, soap, and towels. Light filters through small windows, illuminating the rising steam in soft, ethereal columns. The room echoes with splashes, shouts, and the constant rhythm of work being done. Bathing is a communal affair. Men and women, often separated by time or section, use shared water heated over large stoves. Water must be managed carefully. Too cold and hygiene is compromised. Too hot and burns occur. Workers maintain fires to heat the water, add soap or herbs, and ensure a supply sufficient for the flow of patrons. Each bath requires preparation, vigilance, and physical labor. As workers haul water from wells, tend fires, and supervise the safety of bathers, the laundry houses are no less demanding. Rows of large tubs or vats dominate the space, filled with water heated over open fires. Linen, wool, and cotton fabrics are soaked, scrubbed, beaten, and wrung by hand. Workers, often women, and sometimes children, spend hours in steamy, soapy air, lifting heavy, wet fabrics and bending over the tubs repeatedly. Their muscles ache, skin becomes roughened, and hands cracked from constant exposure to water, soap, and heat. It is monotonous, repetitive labor, yet essential. Clean clothing, sheets, and household textiles reduce disease, maintain social order, and uphold civic pride. The scale of the work is staggering. A single laundry house might serve hundreds of households weekly, each with bedclothes, table linens, and garments requiring cleaning. Public baths accommodate dozens, sometimes hundreds, of patrons per day. Laborers manage the logistics of timing, water heating, fuel supply, and crowd control, ensuring that the flow of people does not overwhelm the available resources. Efficiency is key, yet the work remains physically demanding and often dangerous. Disease prevention is a crucial, if underappreciated, aspect of these spaces. Dirty linen and unwashed bodies can carry lice, fleas, and pathogens. Public baths and laundry houses mitigate the spread of illness, particularly in crowded urban areas. The labor behind maintaining these facilities, scrubbing floors, boiling water, managing wasters, as vital to communal health as the medicines prepared by apothecaries or the grains milled in village mills. Social interaction is woven into the labor. Bath attendants exchange news, gossip, and practical advice. Laundry workers coordinate tasks, sharing techniques for removing stains or handling delicate fabrics. Apprentices learn by observing, imitating, and gradually taking on more responsibility. Knowledge is passed through practice rather than formal instruction, embedding survival skills in everyday chores, despite its importance. This labor is largely invisible in historical records. The people who kept cities clean, bathed the masses, and maintained hygiene were rarely celebrated. Their work was repetitive, exhausting, and often underpaid, yet it sustained the rhythms of daily life. Families could work, trade, and socialize because someone else ensured that their linens were clean, their bodies washed, and their surroundings sanitized. And yet, as you step out of the steam-filled room or the soapy air of the laundry house, a question remains: how many lives, both ordinary and extraordinary, were made possible by the hidden labor of washing, scrubbing, and boiling work, so essential that society could not function without it, yet so overlooked that its importance is only now slowly remembered. As the city wakes and the sun rises, the public baths and laundry houses become hubs of constant activity. Workers move with purpose, repeating the same motions hour after hour, day after day. In the baths, attendants manage water levels, add hot coals to maintain temperature, and supervise patrons. Every drop of water, every basin filled and emptied, is the result of meticulous labor. In the laundry houses, women and children haul wet fabrics, scrub stubborn stains, wring water from heavy textiles, and hang or fold them for return. Their labor is repetitive, exhausting, and unglamorous, yet it sustains the very fabric of urban life. The work is physically punishing. Hands are raw from prolonged exposure to water and soap. Backs ache from bending over vats for hours at a time. Feet throb from standing on wet, slippery floors. Steam and heat weigh heavily, making the air thick and difficult to breathe. Yet workers press on because the city depends on them. The importance of their labor is rarely celebrated, but its absence is immediately felt. Unwashed clothes, foul odors, and the spread of disease remind the community of the vital role these laborers play. Organization and timing are critical. Bathing schedules are staggered to accommodate different groups, with time slots reserved for men, women, and sometimes children. Laundry work is similarly regimented. Each household's textiles must be cleaned, dried, and returned promptly, or tensions arise. Workers must balance speed with quality, ensuring that linens are properly cleaned and that fabrics are not damaged. Mistakes can create conflict, reduce income, or disrupt household routines, emphasizing that even ordinary chores carry significant responsibility. Apprenticeship and skill transmission are central to maintaining efficiency. Younger workers observe seasoned attendants, learning subtle techniques, how to gauge water temperature without thermometers, the proper motion for scrubbing delicate fabrics, or the best ways to wring out heavy linens without tearing them. Knowledge is passed through repetition, observation, and correction. Experience becomes a form of expertise, allowing laborers to complete their work faster and more safely while minimizing waste or error. The social dimension of these spaces is notable. Workers communicate constantly, coordinating tasks and exchanging information. Gossip, news, and advice circulate, often carried along with the steam or the scent of soap. Public baths and laundry houses are places where the laborers themselves form communities, supporting each other in physically and emotionally demanding work. These connections help sustain morale in environments that are crowded, hot, and monotonous. The labor also reflects broader urban realities. Water is scarce, fuel for heating expensive, and the sheer volume of clothing and linens enormous. Laborers must constantly manage scarce resources, stretching soap, conserving fuel, and maximizing the utility of available water. They invent small techniques to increase efficiency, tilting tubs for better drainage, layering clothes for faster drying, or arranging tasks to minimize wasted movement. These innovations, though small, demonstrate ingenuity, born of necessity, health, and hygiene. The very purpose of these chores remain precarious. Epidemics of typhus, cholera, and other diseases frequently sweep through cities. The work of scrubbing, boiling, and bathing directly mitigates these threats, yet it cannot eliminate them entirely. Laborers themselves are exposed to waterborne illnesses, burns, and exhaustion. Every day, their survival is tested, even as they ensure the survival and health of countless others. Despite its physical and social challenges, the work is steady, reliable, and deeply embedded in daily life. Households, tradespeople, and institutions rely on clean linens and hygiene to function. The repetitive, often overlooked tasks performed by bath attendants and laundry workers make possible a rhythm of urban existence that is otherwise taken for granted. It is a hidden foundation upon which city life depends. As you step back from the steam-filled air, watching linens hung to dry and bathers emerge refreshed, a thought lingers. How many lives were safeguarded? How many routines were maintained? And how much of urban health and productivity depended entirely on labor that was invisible, repetitive, and undervalued? How fragile was the city's survival when its essential chores were performed by unseen hands? As the day winds down, the laborers of the public baths and laundry houses reflect the quiet endurance that sustains urban life. Steam rises from emptied tubs, clean linens are folded and stacked, and the rhythmic scrubbing of fabric slows to a final swish. The work, though repetitive and physically demanding, has ensured the functioning of households, the health of the community, and the maintenance of social norms surrounding cleanliness and comfort. The physical toll on workers is undeniable. Blisters and sores mark hands, backs ache from constant bending, and skin is roughened from prolonged exposure to water and soap. Yet, despite exhaustion, the labor continues day after day. Each scrubbed sheet, each boiled garment, each supervised bath represents a small act of survival, an act that prevents disease, maintains dignity, and preserves the routines of countless households. Beyond the physical demands, the work requires organization, foresight, and adaptability. Laborers manage scarce resources, fuel for heating water, soap, and clean water itself. They anticipate the flow of patrons and household needs, adjusting schedules and workflow to prevent backlog. Mistakes are costly, not just for the household served, but for the social and economic fabric of the city. Every task, however mundane, carries weight and responsibility. The social dimension is equally significant. Apprentices and junior workers learn not only the technical aspects of washing and bathing, but also resilience, patience, and teamwork. Knowledge is transmitted quietly: how to scrub effectively, how to heat water efficiently, or how to manage the workflow of hundreds of items at once. Laborers develop an unspoken coordination that sustains the institution and ensures the reliability of services that urban life depends upon. Evening offers fleeting moments of reflection. Workers step back, surveying the cleaned linens, emptied vats, and orderly baths. The results of their labor are invisible in most historical records, yet they are profound. Without these efforts, households would struggle to maintain health, hygiene, and dignity. Epidemics would spread more easily, domestic routines would falter, and the fragile order of urban life would be at risk. The significance of this labor extends beyond mere cleanliness. It illustrates a broader principle of historical survival. Ordinary work, repetitive and often unnoticed, underpins the functioning of society. Bath attendants and laundry workers are among the countless unsung figures whose diligence shapes daily life, mitigates disaster, and sustains communities. Their efforts create the conditions for families, tradespeople, and institutions to thrive. And yet, despite its importance, this labor remains largely forgotten. The heroic tales of explorers, rulers, and inventors dominate history, while the quiet, repetitive acts that literally preserved life go unrecorded. In acknowledging these efforts, one gains a deeper appreciation of human resilience and the structures, both physical and social, that allow societies to endure. As the last sheets are folded and the final bathers leave, one thought lingers: how much of history itself, survival, its daily continuity, its very order, has depended on the hidden, repetitive, and physically demanding work of those who labored unseen, ensuring cleanliness and health when no one else could. How fragile and yet how resilient is the human world built on such quiet foundations. Imagine a bustling railway station in the late 19th or early 20th century. Steam hisses from locomotives, whistles pierce the air, and crowds surge along platforms carrying parcels, trunks, and baskets. Among this chaos are the railway porters, men and women whose labor keeps the station functioning, whose endurance supports the movement of people, goods, and the expanding industrial world. Life as a porter is neither glamorous nor leisurely. It is a relentless, physically demanding rhythm of lifting, carrying, and organizing that few outside the profession fully understand. Stepping into the station, the first impression is one of movement and noise. Porters dart among the crowd, their eyes constantly scanning for luggage in need of transport, passengers requiring guidance, or trains preparing to depart. Trunks of wood and leather, heavy bags, and parcels of all shapes and sizes must be loaded onto trolleys, lifted onto platforms, or carried directly onto the carriages. Every object presents a challenge. Some are unwieldy, others fragile. Many far heavier than a single person might comfortably lift. The physical demands are immediate and unrelenting. A single shift might involve moving dozens of heavy trunks, often up and down stairs, along uneven platforms, and across crowded areas. Porters develop strength, endurance, and an acute sense of balance, learning to lift efficiently while avoiding injury. Yet accidents are common. Slipping on wet platforms, dropping a trunk, or colliding with a passenger can result in bruises, fractures, or worse. Protective equipment is minimal, and personal safety often relies on experience, caution, and quick reflexes. Time is equally pressing. Trains run on strict schedules, and delays are costly for both passengers and the railway company. Porters must work quickly, coordinating with colleagues to load and unload luggage before the train departs. A missed trunk or delayed carriage can disrupt the entire system. Precision and timing are essential. Efficiency is measured not only in speed, but in accuracy and reliability. The labor is visible in its results, but invisible in its nuance. The skill lies in moving large volumes of weight with minimal error under intense pressure. Stations are social microcosms. Porters interact constantly with passengers, colleagues, and station. Courteous behavior, quick communication, and conflict management are as critical as physical strength. Many porters also develop informal systems of signaling and coordination, passing luggage efficiently across crowded platforms or alerting each other to hazards. These social skills are learned through experience rather than formal instruction, embedded in the rhythm of daily labor. The work is physically punishing. Muscles ache from repeated lifting, backs bear the brunt of constant strain, and hands blister from gripping handles or dragging trunks across rough surfaces. Weather compounds the challenge. Icy platforms in winter, scorching sun in summer, rain making surfaces slick. Yet, despite fatigue, porters persist, knowing that the station and the thousands of passengers who pass through it daily depends on their endurance and reliability. Economic pressures shape the labor environment. Many porters are paid modest wages, often reliant on tips from passengers. Long hours, physically taxing work, and limited security create a precarious existence. Survival depends not only on strength, but on stamina, resilience, and the ability to maintain speed and accuracy under unrelenting pressure. Those who succeed develop a combination of physical skill, social acumen, and situational awareness that allows them to navigate the dangers and demands of the station. The rhythm of the station dictates daily life. Early morning arrivals, midday rushes, and evening departures structure shifts. Even brief pauses in the flow are filled with preparation, checking trolleys, arranging luggage, or planning routes across the platform. Every shift is both repetitive and urgent, a constant negotiation between human endurance and the mechanical demands of steam locomotion. And as you watch a porter lift a heavy trunk, step lightly over a wet platform, and navigate a sea of hurried passengers, a question arises: how many countless journeys, commercial exchanges, and moments of social mobility were made possible only because these unseen, tireless laborers carried the burdens of steam-age parcels and the invisible weight of human reliance. As the day continues, the station hums with unceasing motion. Porters move in a constant cycle of lifting, carrying, sorting, and stacking. Each piece of luggage represents a task requiring attention, strength, and precision. Trunks must be weighed mentally, adjusted for balance, and transported across uneven surfaces. Parcels may be fragile or oddly shaped, demanding careful handling. The physical strain accumulates with every step, yet efficiency is paramount. A single delay can ripple through train schedules and disrupt the coordination of staff across the station. The work is repetitive but never monotonous. While the motions, lifting, bending, stepping, repeat, each object and each passenger presents a unique challenge. Porters must anticipate weight, gauge balance, and choose the optimal path to transport items safely. The constant flux of crowds, shifting luggage, and moving trains requires acute awareness and rapid decision-making. Experience teaches subtle techniques: how to pivot a trunk to avoid collision, how to distribute weight evenly across shoulders, or how to navigate a crowded platform without causing disruption. Time pressures amplify the physical demands. Trains adhere to rigid schedules, leaving porters with narrow windows to complete their tasks. Morning rushes bring streams of passengers with oversized luggage. Afternoon departures pile the platforms with heavy trunks bound for distant cities. Even brief delays can cascade, causing missed connections and dissatisfied travelers. Porters internalize these pressures, adjusting pace and posture to maintain speed without sacrificing safety. Survival depends on the delicate balance of strength, endurance, and situational awareness. Endurance extends beyond the physical. Porters develop strategies to sustain energy over long shifts, short stretches, rhythmic breathing, rotating tasks with colleagues, and consuming small, portable meals between duties. Fatigue is constant, yet social bonds and shared experience provide a form of psychological support. Colleagues signal each other about heavy loads, crowded areas, or approaching hazards, forming a tacit network of cooperation. Survival relies not only on individual stamina, but on the ability to work seamlessly within this collaborative system. Economic reality shapes every aspect of life for porters. Wages are modest, and tips from passengers often supplement income. This dependence on gratuities creates subtle social dynamics. Helpfulness, politeness, and efficiency are not merely professional expectations, but financial necessities. Porters navigate these social pressures alongside their physical workload, balancing attention to passengers with the demands of relentless labor. Success requires dexterity in both body and mind. Weather and environment add further challenges. Rain-soaked platforms become slippery, snow and ice make lifting precarious, and summer heat drains energy quickly. Steam from locomotives rises and mingles with smoke from coal-fired engines, making the air thick and difficult to breathe. Yet porters adapt, learning to maintain footing, conserve energy, and work efficiently under adverse conditions. Adaptation and resilience are critical components of daily survival. The cumulative effect of repetitive labor shapes the body and mind. Muscles grow stronger, hands tougher, and reflexes sharper. Mental endurance develops alongside physical strength as porters anticipate movement, assess risk, and adjust to ever-changing circumstances. Even routine tasks carry weight. The repetition builds competence and reliability, ensuring the smooth flow of passengers and goods through the station. Despite the visibility of their work, the complexity and skill behind it remain largely unnoticed. Passengers may see porters lifting trunks, but rarely appreciate the calculation, judgment, and stamina required to prevent injury, manage heavy loads, and maintain precise timing. The labor, though essential, is often invisible in historical accounts, its significance overshadowed by the grand narratives of trains, industry, and commerce. And yet, as you watch a team of porters coordinate a flurry of trunks, navigating crowded platforms with precision and care, one question lingers: how many moments of urban life, economic exchange, and social mobility depended entirely on these tireless, unseen workers whose endurance and skill ensured the smooth functioning of the steam-age railway station? As evening descends on the station, the rhythm of porters' work continues unabated. Trains arrive and depart, steam hisses, and the clamor of passengers rises and falls like the tide. Porters remain in constant motion, lifting, stacking, and carrying. Their endurance is remarkable, honed by years of repetition, physical strain, and the relentless pace of industrial life. Each trunk transported is not merely a piece of luggage, but a vital contribution to the functioning of an interconnected world. Physical labor has sculpted their bodies. Muscles are conditioned from repeated lifting. Hands are calloused, yet precise in grip. Reflexes sharpened to respond to sudden slips, shifting loads, or jostling passengers. Stamina is developed through long hours on foot, moving tens or hundreds of heavy objects in a single shift. Porters endure injuries, blisters, and exhaustion. Yet their persistence ensures that trains depart on time, passengers' belongings arrive safely, and commerce flows. But survival in the station is not only physical. Social acuity is critical. Porters read passengers' needs, anticipate logistical challenges, and coordinate silently with colleagues to prevent chaos. Mistakes are costly, not just for the individual, but for the entire system. A dropped trunk could damage goods, injure someone, or delay an entire train. The work requires judgment honed over years, often invisible to those who witness only the surface motion of lifting and carrying. Economic pressures remain a constant presence. Wages are low, and many porters rely on tips, which makes efficiency, courtesy, and attentiveness financially vital. The work is not optional. It sustains livelihoods. Yet, despite the intensity, porters develop routines to manage fatigue, pacing themselves, exchanging tasks, and relying on teamwork. Survival is as much about strategy as it is about strength. The station itself is a microcosm of industrial life. It is a place where time, labor, and commerce intersect. Porters mediate between machinery and people, navigating the steam, noise, and crowds that define the environment. Their work makes possible a flow of goods, ideas, and individuals that underpins urban life and economic growth. Without their relentless effort, the complex machinery of rail transport would falter. As night deepens, some porters remain at the platforms, ensuring that late arrivals are accommodated, luggage accounted for, and the station remains organized. Others return to brief rest before the next shift begins, muscles aching, bodies sore, but spirits resilient. Their labor may go unnoticed by travelers focused on schedules, destinations, or personal errands. Yet the city, the railway, and countless livelihoods depend on their unseen endurance. The broader significance is profound. Porters illustrate a principal seen across history. Ordinary, repetitive labor underpins extraordinary systems. Steam engines, expanding trade networks, and urban growth rely on the patient, skilled, and often invisible work of individuals whose endurance and reliability are taken for granted. They demonstrate that survival, progress, and daily life often depend on the quiet exertion of hands and bodies committed to sustaining order in a chaotic world. And as you step back from the bustling platform, watching porters carry trunk after trunk with unflagging precision, one thought lingers: how many lives, journeys, and exchanges depended entirely on the endurance, skill, and invisible labor of these men and women. How much of the industrial age, and indeed of modern urban life, rested on the uncelebrated work of those who bore the weight of both luggage and human expectation. And now, as our journey through the quiet corners of history comes to an end, we leave behind the crowded rooms, the bustling stations, the hidden workshops, and the silent endurance of everyday life. We have witnessed the patience of candlemakers, the rhythm of sailors below deck, the meticulous labor of bath attendants and laundry workers, and the tireless strength of railway porters. We have seen how ordinary hands and quiet persistence shaped survival, sustained communities, and kept the world moving, often without recognition, yet always with profound impact. Perhaps the greatest lesson of all is that history is not only made in the halls of kings or on the fields of battle. It is made in the steady, repetitive, invisible work of countless people whose names may never be remembered, but whose efforts built the rhythm of daily life, the foundations of society, and the continuity of human survival. So, as you drift into your own rest tonight, carry with you the quiet, enduring stories of those who labored unseen. And remember that even the most ordinary life can leave an extraordinary mark. Sleep now, calmly, and let the world's hidden histories lull you into peace.